Good morning, everyone. Um, uh, Happy Halloween. Um, Halloween is a interesting holiday. Um, has something to do with ghosts and vampires and candy and costumes. Um, and there's different ideas or theories about the history of the holiday, where it comes from, what it's really about. Um, but one idea that is often associated with Halloween is the idea that there are these two realms or two worlds, the world of the living and the world of the dead, and that for the most part these two realms are fairly separate, um, but that sometimes it's possible, or more possible than at other times, to have some sort of interaction between the two worlds, um, and that Halloween corresponds to a time of year when this is a, a greater possibility. And there's actually a very similar idea in many Buddhist countries, especially in East Asia, um, China, Japan, Korea, Vietnam, have a whole month. It's called different names in different countries, but it's often just called Ghost Month, which is usually the seventh month of the year. Sometimes it's the eighth. But this is a time of year when it's believed that the world of the living and the world of the dead are a little closer together, a little more. It's always easy to get from the world of the living to the world of the dead, and we all will do that soon enough. Um, but that's a one-way ticket as a general rule. Um, the idea of there being uh, the idea that the barrier between those two worlds becomes a little less solid sometimes means that uh, potentially you could go back and forth, or but more specifically, it usually refers to a time when those who are in the world of the dead can come here to the realm of the living and visit. So uh, in some parts, I took a Japanese language class a while back, and our Japanese teacher, she told us about the custom in her part of Japan, which is during, I think it's called Obon, the which is the Japanese name for this ghost month. I'm not sure what Obon means literally, and I hope I'm getting at the pronunciation more or less right. But she said that during this month, uh, they make little figurines and place them in the main room of the house on a mantle, and the figurines are of horses, and the horses are there for the ancestors to ride, to come and visit during this month. And then they also make little another set of figurines that are oxes, and those are for the ancestors to ride when they leave. And the idea being that one is very anxious to welcome one's ancestors during this month, and so you want them to come fast. You want them to ride the horses, whereas you're sad when the ancestors have to leave again, because the boundary is becoming more solid and they have to get back to their place. But you don't want them to leave, and so you give them oxes to ride back, because oxes go very slowly compared to horses, so that they don't go away. So they come fast and they go back slowly. So that's kind of a nice custom. Um, um, and usually right in the middle of Ghost Month is a particular day um, when when the barrier is especially thin or easy to get across. And so it's usually a special holiday or a special day at that time, and it's often just called the Ghost Festival. And so one thing that's done during the Ghost Festival is that people set up altars everywhere and put all kinds of food and beverages on the altars. And then, and this is a very common practice in Buddhist and Hindu cultures. You set out offerings for the gods and goddesses, or the Buddhas and Bodhisattvas, or the ancestors, or whoever, and after they've taken their share, which often turns out to be not very much, then everyone celebrates and eats what's left. I don't know if Buddhists use this term or not, but Hindus call this prasad, which literally means, I believe, leftovers. So we have the leftovers, whatever the gods and goddesses and Buddhas and Bodhisattvas and ancestors don't take, we get the leftovers. And this is often a wonderful kind of a celebration after a ritual or ceremony. Anyway, so one might ask, what does anything like that have to do with Buddhism? One might wonder. So if you're familiar with the actual teachings of the Buddha, that is the teachings that are actually attributed to the Buddha, whether it's in the sacred texts of the Theravada Buddhist tradition, which are written in Pali, or the sacred texts of the Mahayana Buddhist tradition, which are written in Sanskrit and Chinese and Tibetan, originally in Sanskrit. But most of the Sanskrit, so in Mahayana Buddhism, most of what we have of the Mahayana Buddhist sutras no longer exists in Sanskrit. So we have to rely on fortunately, Chinese and Tibetan Buddhists to put great effort into translating those texts. Anyway, so whatever, and just one other thing is that in Mahayana Buddhism, we include all of the texts of the Theravada Buddhism as well, as part of our sacred literature. But whichever school or yana of Buddhism you want to be associated with, the Buddha frequently talked about past lives and future lives. In fact, one of the most common ways for the Buddha to categorize his own students was in terms of how many more lifetimes they would live before they became enlightened. And so the highest grade then was the non-returners. And these were people who were already arhats. And if you've ever read any Buddhist texts, especially any of the Theravada Buddhist texts, you've encountered this concept, this phrase, non-returners. These are the arhats, who already have attained individual liberation in that lifetime while they were with the Buddha. And then the next level after that was the once returners, who would be reborn one more time, and then they would become enlightened. And there was even a kind of the Buddha taught for almost 50 years, so he got a chance to fill in a lot of the details over that time. Every once in a while, he would just go off and practice on his own. But most of the time, he was hanging out with his students, traveling around to different places and talking a lot. And Ananda was always there, committing everything to memory. And so, so sometimes he would refer to students who would not attain, who would not become arhats in this lifetime, but who would attain enlightenment during the transition between this lifetime and the next. And he used a kind of a cool image for this. He said it's like a red hot piece of iron that the blacksmith hits with the hammer, and then a spark flies off, and the spark goes out as it's flying through the air before it hits the ground again. If the spark is still glowing while it hits the ground, then that's someone who still has to be born one more time. But if the spark goes out in midair, then that's someone who attained enlightenment in between one lifetime and the next. And that's another thing that the Buddha talked about, is the intermediate state. Now, in the oh yeah, that reminds me of something. Ran across an interesting quote. There's a great book about Zen called The Inexhaustible Lamp. And so the book was originally written by a student of Hakuin. Hakuin was a great Japanese Zen teacher who lived, he was kind of contemporaneous with Benjamin Franklin, if you want to kind of place him historically. Hakuin was a little older than Benjamin Franklin by 2 or 3 decades, but they lived around the same time. And Benjamin Franklin actually had some interest in Eastern religion. He was a vegetarian briefly when he was a teenager. Anyway, so Hakuin had a student named Torei Enji, I think is the correct pronunciation, who wrote this book about his teachers, about Hakuin's teaching, called The Inexhaustible Lamp. And it's available in English translation. And it's some people consider it like too systematic. So since it's so systematic, that doesn't strike many people as being very Zen. But it's a really wonderful way to get some insight into Hakuin's teaching. And the English version of The Inexhaustible Lamp contains a lot of commentaries by a modern Japanese teacher named Daibi of Unkan. Okay, and this is a quote from Master Daibi of Unkan. Oh yeah. An old master said, "In the monk's hall, sit Zazen and study the way. By a bright window, let the old teachings illumine the heart." So here he's talking about study. Well, he's talking about practicing Zazen, and studying Buddhism, studying the Sutras. So he says, an old master said, "In the monk's hall, sit Zazen and study the way. By a bright window, let the old teachings illumine the heart. For even if," and this is him continuing on, "for even if you say that you have understood," that is, had some realization, maybe even Kensho or Satori, "even if you say that you have understood, you must check and see whether it tallies with the teachings of the Buddha and the sayings of the ancestors. You must make sure whether your understanding is genuine or not. Therefore, never disregard the Buddha's sutras and the records of the ancestors. They follow the traces of the teaching and forge the link of faith in the great ocean of the Buddha-Dharma, thus constituting the motive force for training." So this is an issue that comes up not just among Western Zen Buddhists, but Master Daibi wrote that in 1930, before there was really much. It was beginning in the West, a greater interest in Zen. but Master Daibi was primarily addressing himself, well, actually exclusively addressing himself to Japanese students of Zen, saying, don't disregard the sutras, even though we don't rely on the sutras, we don't disregard them. And in the sutras, it's very clear. The Buddha constantly talked about past lives and future lives. One way of understanding the different kind of motivations that bring people to practice, and that really form the basis for our practice, is well, speaking of Hakuin, his motivation, and this is a sneaky thing that Hakuin did in his autobiographical writings. In his autobiography, he makes it very clear what his initial motivation for practicing Buddhism was. And it was fear of hell. Which again is something that many people might consider doesn't sound very Zen. You can't get much more Zen than Hakuin, though. So Hakuin makes a big deal about this and talking about his childhood. And then when he did become a Buddhist practitioner, a serious Buddhist practitioner, and since Hakuin never did anything part way, for him to become a serious Buddhist practitioner meant become a monk. He had to become a monk. So he became a monk, and then he was no longer primarily motivated by avoiding hell. Now he wanted to become enlightened. and very quickly, he became a monk, I think, when he was like 15. And when he was 19, he was very frustrated by the fact that he still wasn't enlightened, which I can remember what it was like when I was 19. And the 19-year-olds often think they are enlightened. I mean, I didn't think I was enlightened, but I did think I knew everything. But Hakuin at least had the good sense to realize he didn't know everything. He was frustrated by this fact. And for the next over 20 years, Hakuin had many realizations, many kenshos, many satoris. But he also had the good sense, even with those, to realize it still wasn't it. Until at the age of 42, while reading the Lotus Sutra, he had his final great awakening. And so in the and for the rest of his life, in his teaching, Hakuin very strongly emphasized the need to attain kensho, but that was just a starting point, and that what he called post-satori practice was the true practice of a bodhisattva, because then you're having attained some realization of your own, then your practice is then dedicated to helping others. And so some teachers call this the three scopes: fear of hell or fear of suffering, wanting to become enlightened, and working to save all beings. And this is actually in our bell chant. We chant in the bell chant, and sometimes it's referred to as the evening bell chant, but you can chant it in the morning or in the evening. And I was fortunate enough to spend 2 weeks in October at Furnace Mountain and got to hear the bell chant every morning and every evening. But in the bell chant, we chant I Jiok Chul Samge Won Songbol Do Jung Seng. I Jiok means leave hell, means free from hell. Chul Samge means depart from the three worlds. So leave hell and depart from the three worlds refer to. So it isn't necessary to believe in past lives and future lives to kind of get this point that the desire to leave hell means the desire to avoid the worst kinds of suffering, or the worst parts of samsara. There are some great parts of samsara, if you haven't noticed, because we live in samsara. We're all very familiar with samsara, so we know all about the hell realms in samsara, which are the places where we suffer. Anytime we experience intense suffering, severe pain, or mental anguish, heartbreak, loss, yeah, we all travel through many hell realms in the course of our lives, and but we also know that there's some parts of samsara, some parts of our lives that are not so bad, and so Jiok in the bell chant corresponds to the initial impetus that generally brings people to practice any kind of spiritual practice, religion, or even philosophy or whatever, that you're usually motivated by suffering and a desire to end it, and to end the most and this is without having a very clear understanding of what suffering really is and what its causes are. We just know we don't like it and we want to get rid of it. But the next part, the next three words, chul samge, literally means leave the three worlds, which means leave all of samsara. Samge, the three worlds, refers to all of samsara, including the good parts, and that means that corresponds to a state where one has some understanding of, like I know what I'm talking about, but but some understanding, I think, and everyone sitting here has moved on to this stage. This is a stage, how do you know if you're at this stage? If you get up at 7 o'clock in the morning and you don't have anything better to do or you can't think of anything better to do, because this is a good thing to do. There are other things you could be doing, right? But if your choice is to come and sit Zazen, possibly have to listen to somebody talk for 25 minutes, but mostly just sit and practice your meditation, then you have gone beyond simply seeking an end to the worst kinds of personal suffering. You're looking for something beyond that, maybe kensho, or whatever you want to call it, realization, kensho. Chul samge corresponds to that. But then the next 6 syllables, one songbul do jung seng, is the and people who are familiar with Mahayana Buddhism generally just focus on that, which is to become a Buddha and save all beings. Zen Master Sung San often he corresponded with his students a lot. He wrote letters. This is even before email. He often wrote letters back and forth with his students, and he would often end his letters saying, "Hurry up, attain enlightenment, and save all beings." And so that's one songbul, vow, attain Buddha. Do jung seng, save all beings. One songbul, do jung seng. Yeah. So happy Halloween, everybody. I got candy yesterday to give out tonight. Hopefully some kids will come. Thank you for listening to this talk on the realm of the living, the realm of the dead, hell realms, lots of realms, But most importantly is, what is our motivation and the different kinds of motivation we have, and what is our ultimate, motivation, which is to help others. Wan Songbul Dojung Sang. Hurry up, get enlightenment, save all beings. Thank you for listening.